We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chav Zayin, in volume 27. This is the first sicha of the Parsha Kedoshim. It's a Rashi sicha. The Rebbe asks a very simple question on the Rashi and some more details on the specifics of the Rashi. But the Rashi says when the pasuk says Lifnei Iver Sitein Michshol, literally it means in front of a blind person you can't send a stumbling so he doesn't trip over it. And Rashi goes and translates it that it means that a person who uh, is blind, not figuratively blind, meaning he doesn't have the right idea, don't give him a wrong advice. And why does Rashi not learn that you can't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person? The Rebbe will explain it at length, but the Rebbe's key idea, the brilliant insight, is that we're not trying to tell you here just another time you're not allowed to cause damage to the other person by having somebody trip, a blind person trip. We learned about not opening up a pit in the public domain so nobody gets hurt in there. You even have to pay money for that. For sure, you're not allowed to do that. Uh, and therefore, we have to say there is some chiddush over here. The Rebbe explains it's not just telling you to do, not to do something where the other one gets hurt. It's telling you that you can't advise the other, can't give advice to another person something which is not to his benefit, which means if you're not thinking about his benefit when he asks you, even if he's not being hurt by it, as Rebbe will explain, he may not be hurt by it, but you're not allowed to give something which is not for his benefit. And that's why Rashi says, and you'll end up buying that piece of land that he sold. It's good for you, not for him. So the key is that there's an additional prohibition that Rashi understands that the pasuk is trying to tell us. This will give us a big understanding. We'll have to wait to see clearly what all the details are, but it's telling us that this pasuk comes up with another chiddush, and then the end of the sicha, the Rebbe brings out how much we have to care about another yid that we learn out from here. Let's look inside. Kedoshim. Oif v'lifnei Iver lo Sitein Michshol. So the pasuk says in front of a blind person, don't give a stumbling. Is Rashi mefarish? So Rashi says, what does this pasuk say? Lifnei hasuma bedovor. We're not talking about really a blind person. We're talking about he's blind in this matter. He doesn't see this matter. Loi sitin eitzo sheheina hoigenes loi. Do not give advice to him which is not fitting for him. Don't give a wrong advice to the person who is blind, who doesn't see, he doesn't understand. But you understand, don't give him a wrong advice, which is not good for him. And then Rashi brings the example as we'll see later on in Siv Gimel, to sell a property, to buy a donkey, as the Rebbe will discuss later on. But the first thing before we learn the example and all these questions that will pile up that the Rebbe is going to ask leads us to the Rebbe's conclusion, what the pasuk is really telling us over here. But the very beginning, the first question that we have, why shall we not just translate the pasuk, mikra, don't put a stumbling in front of a blind person? Darf man verstehen, so we need to understand, from wann nennt Rashi b'pshuto mikra? Where does Rashi take this in the simple meaning of the verse? Zu moitzi sein die Wörter mit de pshutom, to take out the words from their literal meaning. Unanstatt zeir poshet und taich, instead of their simple translation, As mitor nit legen am Michshol far einem, was ken nit zen Rachmon litzlan, that instead of reading it in the simple text, that you're not allowed to put something to trip over, a Michshol, a stumbling, for somebody who can't see, God forbid, a person is blind, he can't see, God forbid, and you're going to put something in front of him to trip him. Why does Rashi not learn it simply? Is there mefarish? So what does Rashi do? How does Rashi explain it? Instead of saying it simply not to place something in front of a blind person who will trip over it, is there mefarish as Iver, what it means, blind meint, hasuma bedover. Doesn't mean a person who is physically blind, he means he's blind in this matter. He doesn't know this matter. Unbeis, and number two, what does the stumbling mean? Michshol means eitzo shehene genesloi, an advice. You're advising him to do something which is not good for him. That's what's meant. Loy sitin loy, don't advise him something wrong. Where does Rashi take this? Why can't Rashi learn in this simple text that it's a blind person? Don't put down something that he can trip over. And the Rebbe brings down a possible interpretation from the Mizrahi. The Bilyo Mizrahi, in his commentary, he explains that this pasuk follows the previous pasuk, and just like in the previous pasuk, it's not confined to what the pasuk says, but it means in a broader term. So here too, but the Rebbe says it doesn't really fit. Let's look inside. The Mizrahi learns that das kommt behemshach zum Friedrich Pirush Rashi. That this commentary of Lifnei Iver Sitein Michshol means not to give a bad advice, follows the previous Rashi's commentary. The Verter lo yisekalel chedesh. The pasuk says that a person who is dumb and mute, a person who can't hear, don't curse him. So, is it only a person who is a chedesh that you don't curse? So, Rashi comments, ainly a chedesh. We see from this pasuk, a person who is a chedesh can hear and speak, you shouldn't curse. From how do we know everybody? So Rashi says, because there's a pasuk that says, "Ba'am cholosoyer." So why does the pasuk say chedesh over here? So Rashi says that a chedesh is during the lifetime and not during his death. That's what the pasuk says like that. So in Kain lo nemer chedesh, ma chedesh b'chayim, avkol everything is mechayim. V'bal di tzvei dinim shtein in pasuk behemshech echod, since these two halachas say in one flow, in one continuation, darf man sagen, says the Mizrahi, as Iver dum yed chedesh, that when the pasuk says the blind person not to put a stumbling, is a similar way, just like the Torah says you can't curse the chedesh. Ma chedesh lav davke chedesh, just like a chedesh means not necessarily a chedesh. Af Iver lav davke Iver, says the Mizrahi here, doesn't mean necessarily Iver. So therefore it means suma bedova also. But that's different, the Rebbe asks, as the Mefarshim asks, because over there, we're not changing the meaning of chedesh. We're just saying that it's not only a chedesh. But here, Rashi is saying that Lifnei Iver doesn't mean a blind person. It means something else. It means a person who doesn't have a good idea what to do. And don't give us something means give him a wrong advice. We're not saying that it's included. It's the opposite. Aber der Pirush is kosher. This interpretation is difficult with Mefarshim fragen, as the commentators question. Don't curse the the mute person, the chedesh, is Rashi nit moitze the word chedesh mipshute. Rashi does not take out the meaning of the word chedesh from its literal meaning. Sagt nor, he only is saying, as a meleren top von chedesh, that we learn from chedesh, as ma chedesh. Just like a chedesh is mechayim, avkol chulu is mechayim. So we're learning from it, but the pasuk is talking about chedesh. It's coming to teach us. We know everything else is labam chulu. And why does the Torah write chedesh over here to teach us a halacha? But chedesh means a chedesh. Mashenke by Lifnei Michshol, as opposed to over here, Lifnei Michshol, sagt Rashi, as Iver meint nit kip shutei. Rashi says Iver means not as the simple meaning. Einer was kenit zen, somebody who cannot see, who has no vision. Nor asume bedover, somebody who's blind in this matter. Kum tois loy pirush Rashi. So according to Rashi, it turns out Asuma is nit dumya de cheresh. It follows, but it's not similar to cheresh. Cheresh means literally, and Suma does not mean literally. The Mizrahi is trying to say that cheresh includes more. But Rashi is not saying that Suma includes more. Rashi is saying Iver includes more. Rashi is saying Iver means not a blind person. It means person who's blind doesn't know in this matter. And over there, cheresh means literally, so it's not the same. So how could you say because of the same, it doesn't flow? So why does Rashi explain it? Therefore, how does it come Rashi explains it that Lifnei doesn't mean literally like a blind person? And then further, there's another difference over here. Okay, let's say the Lifnei Iver means not only a blind person, it means like that. But why does Rashi have to say that you're giving him bad advice? Why can't Rashi not say that you're putting something in front of him which is a stumbling? As for example, the Gemara says to give a Nazir wine, and it's a prohibition for the Nazir to drink wine. And you don't have a right to hand him a cup of wine to the Nazir because he's blind, he doesn't care about the Aveda, or he doesn't know. You're giving him a Michshol. So you could say, Lo Sitein Michshol. Here Rashi is saying, you're not actually giving you're just giving him advice. Second question, even if you're going to say that Iver is lav davke, again, oich der biur hanal is blois atam, the explanation of the Mizrachis would only be a reason for vos medaf mefarish zayin as Iver lav davke Iver. That's only a reason why we have to say that the blind does not necessarily mean only a blind person, one who can't see, nor suma bedover, but somebody who is blind in this matter. As bleibt aber nicht move on, but it's still not understood. Was is Rashi's hechrech? What is Rashi's proof? What forces Rashi to say, as Titen Michshol, give, if name Sitein Michshol, meint nit nisina doesn't mean to give, to place a physical giving. Nit Michshol stam, and not to just give a stumbling, nor davke anamira, not to give a stumbling, but to give saying something. And that it means advice that is not fitting to him. How does Rashi know this is what it's talking about? Rashi should have said, what Rashi seemingly should have said, as it's according to halacha. As Lifnei Iver goimer kumt mazer sein, that the pasuk for a blind person don't place a stumbling is coming to warn us. Besonders geben a Michshol zu a Yidden asuma bedover. Don't give a stumbling block to a Yid who is blind in this matter. Advar Aveda. Don't give him something which is a sin. V'dedugma in Shas, as the example in the Talmud, in the Gemara, lo yoshit odom koshel yain lenozir. A person should not stretch and give a cup of wine to a nazir. Nazir is prohibited in drinking wine. Don't do anisina. Don't give him the wine to the blind person, to the nazir, which is an aveda for him. Was thereby is nit an inyan funamira. First of all, it's not saying. It's not saying. Norapulus nisina Michshol shalaveda. You're giving him a stumbling of an aveda. You're not saying something which is not fitting for him, but you're giving an aveda. So while you're trying, the Mizrahi is trying to answer that it includes more than just a blind, literally, but why does it actually have to change the giving to mean something which is saying advice? Why does it actually not say that it means to hand him something which would be a nisina, which he's not allowed to, which he's blind to? So, first question the Rebbe wants to know, why can't we translate this simply meaning a blind person, don't stumble him with something that he can trip over? That's the first question. And the second question is, as even though the Mizrahi is trying to say because the Pasuk Chedesh doesn't mean necessarily Chedesh, but here we're not saying it's not necessarily a blind person. We're saying that's the taich of Iver, a person who's Suma Bedover. And then even if we want to include more in Lifnei Iver, why do we have to change Sitein Michshol to say that I speak something which is not properly? Why not say give him something which is an Isser, as the Gemara says? We have another possible answer. The Rebbe says from the Gur Aryeh. The pasuk continues after it says, "Don't put a stumbling block." The Torah says, "Fear Hashem." What does it mean, fear Hashem? Rashi explains that sometimes you can pretend, "Oh, I didn't know, I didn't understand." Putting down a stumbling block in front of a blind person, you don't need to say "V'yoresu b'lekecha," but fear God. God knows. Over there could be no mistake. He's a blind person. You're putting a stumbling block, you're going to trip him, so you're not going to make a mistake, or you can't pretend. If you are saying, "Oh, I gave him a wrong advice," so then you can say, "Oh, I thought this was good advice. I didn't realize." Torah says, "V'yoresim l'kecha." So since the Torah writes "V'yoresim l'kecha," we know it doesn't just mean a blind person. Let's look at the inside. Base, the Gur Aryeh Zok, the Gur Aryeh says, as Rashi zeichocha lepirush zeh is from the Messiah Makos. Rashi's proof for this commentary is from the end of the pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'yorei someh lekechani Hashem." Be afraid of God. I'm God. That's why you have to not do what I'm telling you. Don't do it. So fear Hashem. Was der Loshen state, Rashi is mefarish do alasam. This language, why do we have to say fear Hashem specifically when we talk about this Aveda? So Rashi explains right away over here, nor if adover hamosur lelibushalodum. That is used when something which is given over to the heart of the person, which means you won't tell. It's something really what's in your heart when you're doing it. To put down something which is literally kipshute, stumbling, for an Iver, for somebody who's blind, literally kipshute, if he's going to translate pshute, is nit kin dover amosur lelev. This is not something which is given over to what you really have in your heart and mind. This is something physical. So we don't need to tell you that be for Hashem, because the Eibishter knows what you're doing. We don't need to say that. It's obvious. That's Dover Mosur Lelev. Here is obvious. It's an act in which you can tell what his intention is. The Rebbe learned Rashi as that here we're discussing about giving him a advice which is not fitting for him. You don't really know, is he for the good or it's bad. He can slip away and he can say, "Oh, I meant well. I didn't realize I'm giving a bad advice. I thought it was good advice." So that's how we know that Lifnei Iver isn't talking about literally. Literally, you wouldn't have to say V'resim Alakecha because that would be obvious that you're doing wrong. V'resim Alakecha is because there's something that you can hide behind and say, "I didn't know." The Torah tells V'resim Alakecha, don't do it because the Eibishter knows. That's the evidence. That's how the Goraya learns. Aber es ist schwer zu sagen, das ist der Yesod und Hechrech Pirush Rashi. It's difficult to say, the Rebbe says, that this is the basis, and that's what forces Rashi to touch it. In that case, if this is what Rashi means, then Rashi should put it together, these both Rashis, and say, don't give him a not good advice because we are as we see Rashi does. Weil dann wollte Rashi den Pirush from Vayeresim Alekecha. If that is the case, Rashi would have given the commentary Vayeresim Alekecha. Gedav zogen nit in Abzun the Dibra Maschil. He shouldn't say another Rashi, another opening, another quote from the pasuk. Not in themselves Dibra Maschil. Be'em Shechechad. Rashi should say this all in the same quote of the pasuk. Lekach nemar Vayeresim Alekecha. That's why it says Vayeresim Alekecha, because it's Mostur Lili. That's what, if that's what is the proof that this means Yeresim Lekechachud. Ve'al derech der Loshen in Teres Kahanim do. This is similar to the language of the Teres Kahanim. It says taka like that. Shema toimar eitza teiva. Perhaps you're going to say, I was giving him good advice. I thought it was good advice. So, but this is given over to the heart because the person can always say, I thought I meant well because I was given good advice and I made a mistake. So that's why it says, that says in Torah's Koine. So you see that it follows, Shema Toimer Etzoteva follows the interpretation of what Lifnei Michshol. Rashi should have followed it. And we find this example in Rashi as well, when Rashi wants to use the proof from Vayeresim Alekecha that it follows, or that it follows the pasuk. Later on in Rashi, we find a similar way in the Seder from pasuk. But the Torah says you should honor the elders. So Rashi brings down don't sit in his place. And the Gemara, the Rashi says, well, the person is supposed to honor, but Yochel Yatzim Einov, he's going to close his eyes. He's going to say, I didn't see you. He didn't see the older person. Because fear Hashem, this is up to your heart. You can always pretend and argue later on, no, I meant well. That's why the post of Yeresim Alekecha. So you see, Rashi says clearly that so you don't say Yeresim Alekecha. Here Rashi should have said, if Rashi learns, because it says Yeresim Alekecha, don't give him a bad advice. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says two separate things. From them, was Rashi tailed us up in Abzunder Dibra Maskul. Is mashing the fact that Rashi separates it into a separate opening, a separate quote from the pasuk and its own Rashi. It appears as that Pirush Lifnei Hasuma Bedover Leititan Eitzer Shein Egeneslei. This commentary that Rashi says, don't give him advice which is not proper for him, is it's its own idea. Under Hechrech of them, of M, and the why are we forced to say that this means Eitzer Shein Egenes and not a blind person? Is from the Werter. Those are the words, not because later on the way Rashi writes it, it seems that the verse himself is the evidence that it means not a blind person, a person who can't see, but it means somebody who doesn't understand what's good for him, and you're giving him a bad advice. Somehow in the pasuk itself, it's not from the continuation, since Rashi doesn't bunch it together. Okay, that's the first Rashi. But then we have a further problem understanding what is the advice. Rashi gives an example. Rashi doesn't stop here. And Rashi gives an example what advice is bad. Lengthy Rashi. Weiter geht Rashi a Dugma auf Rashi gives an example what would be advice which is not fitting for him. Al Toimar, don't say Mechoir Sodecha. Sell your field. And buy a donkey. You're giving him advice. Sell your field and buy a donkey. And then what do? He sells his field. And you go around him, you circumvent him, and then you take it from him. So now you have a field. Let's say the guy doesn't want to sell you the field. So you're telling him, you know what? Go ahead and buy a donkey. And the person you sold the field to, you're going to go and you're going to take the field from him. You'll take it from the other person. Seems almost from Rashi, it's not good for him. You want to benefit yourself from it. That's what Rashi explains. So the Rebbe says it's nit verstandig. So we don't understand it. There's several questions. To give somebody advice, bad advice, do we need to give an example? Why does Rashi have to articulate and say what the advice is? Aleph. Der Badait von Eitzo Sheinu again is like the meaning to give somebody not proper advice is l'chayra ganz einfacher. It's very simple. Fordert nit kibir does not require explanation. Pavos dav Rashi geben der roiv bechlal aduma. Why does Rashi even need to give an example? What it means to give a bad advice? And then if Rashi wants to give advice, Rashi is giving a difficult. If we're trying to find what it means to give somebody advice which is not fitting for him, is though asach poshutere and leichtere dugmos the meaning. There's a lot simpler and easier examples of it. And the Rebbe will say, now, the Rebbe first says there is lighter. And the Rebbe says in Torah's Kahanim, he gives you several examples, and Rashi seems to choose the most difficult example. This example Rashi brings. Why does Rashi have to choose examples altogether, and why does Rashi bring this example? In Torah's Kahanim, der Mokir, from the Pirush Rashi, that's Rashi takes his interpretation. Comes from Torah's Kahanim. Over there are different examples. And why does Rashi choose this difficult example? It brings three examples of what would be an advice which is not proper for him. Don't tell a person, go out early morning. List him, so then he'll be overtaken. The bandits will rob him. You gave him advice to leave in the morning, and you know that there's robbers over there, and they're going to attack him or take him away, take away his money. Or, Harayim, he tells him, go in the afternoon, don't go in the morning. Bad advice, bishvil sheishtarev. If he goes in the afternoon, he's going to get overheated going in the heat of the day. It's bad advice. Shiakeu sherev shemesh. So that the heat and the sun is going to beat down on him. So That's bad advice. The Korban Terskanim gives this example. Another example, which Rashi says, "Al toimer le mechoires sodcha v'kach l'cha chamer." Don't tell him sell your field and buy a donkey. And then you are going to submit. Then you're going to take the field from him through the fact that he sold it to the other guy. And this is before this, he brings actually as an example which is connected to an Aver. Bas ish ploini mahi lekohuna. A person comes to ask him, what do you think? I want to marry this man's daughter. You think she is fit for kahuna? In other words, she's allowed to marry a kohen. Vihi eina l'psula, but she's not. She's a apostle. So he's going to marry this woman, and she's apostle for kahuna. Bad advice for him. So that's another example. From the alle dugmois hanal, from all of these examples, bringt Rashi dafke the letzte. He brings the last one. Und nicht eine von der erste, not one of the first one, und einfachere dugmois, and similarly these more simple examples than this. The other things seem simpler than just to tell him to go ahead and try to take the field away from him. It's not as posh as the other one. So why does Rashi choose this example? And we'll see. The Rebbe explains that the Rebbe's explanation is Tafke, that example is what Rashi is trying to give over here. Dalit. We're trying to figure out in the Dugma Hanal Gufa, in this example Rashi does give, is nicht verstandig, was Rashi bepshute shel mikra bringt euch dem Siyum. Why does Rashi, in the simple meaning, also bring the end? He says, Rashi says, you are going to circumvent him, you're going to go around him, and you're going to take the field because you got him to sell the field to somebody else. The Rebbe says, simply talking about the bad advice could be, forget about that you're trying to, it's bad advice to go ahead and sell a field for a donkey. But Pashtus is the Eitzah she'eina hegena sloi. Why is this not a fitting? Forget about you trying to take, but why is this a bad advice to him when somebody wants to think, why is it wrong to sell a field to buy a donkey? So the Pashtus, in them, was fardem suma bedover, because the guy who was blind in it, learned mer to have masode v'achamer. It is more worth to him to have a field than a donkey. So you're giving him bad advice to sell his field. Why do we have to? How does it belong here? We're adding that what you're doing over here, you're circumventing him, and you're taking the field away from him. This is a whole new level of what you're doing over here. So the Rebbe asks, we don't need that extra piece that you're circumventing, you're going to take from. That's why it's bad advice. The bad advice is to sell a field for a donkey is the bad advice. But the Rebbe explains, says possibly, if them entfern, if them entfern, maybe we could answer, it's not such a bad advice, a field for a donkey. The Rebbe is going to bring out, normally we know a field is real estate, a donkey is um, movable, it dies, but the Rebbe brings out from the psukim that there is advantage to a chamoir, perhaps over a sodeh. One can argue. From Pasuk in Parshas Vayechi, on the verse Parshas Vayechi, it says, Yisochor chameir gorem revetz ben hashmish b'sayim. Yaakov compares Yisochor, he says he's like a chamoir gorem that revetz ben hashmish b'sayim. Chamer gorem means a bonely, a strong donkey is a chamer gorem. Chamer gorem revetz ben hashmish b'sayim. Where does he kneel? Ben hamish b'sayim. In between the boundaries. What does Rashi explain? What does it mean? He said, Rashi meforer ki chamer chazok, like a strong donkey. Shematinim oiser ma'asakovet. You load the donkey with a heavy load. And Rashi says, Amahalach b'yom u'balaylo. He goes by day and by night. Ve'ein lo lina bebayis. He doesn't have any sleep in the house. You don't take him in. When he wants to rest, the roivis between the boundaries, in the boundaries of the cities in which he leads, brings there the merchandise. He rests right there, between the boundaries of the different cities. He rests over there. This is a Michshol for Yisachar, for his learning Torah. But as far as the donkey, from them for statement, afila ben chomish lemikra. So from this, even a 5-year-old learning chumash understand. As benegei parnosa kemen von achamoir hob merte elus von asoda. That from as far as livelihood, maybe you can have from a donkey more benefit than from a field. It could be a benefit. It could be sell your field, buy a donkey. Why? By ler arbet sai he works by day and by night, the chamoir. It doesn't extra trouble for the owner of the chamoir. He doesn't have to carry anything because the heavy load is carried by the donkey. But when it comes to a field, is the arbet kerogil nor bayom. First of all, you have to work mostly by the daytime. At nighttime, you don't work the field usually. And the owner of the field has to put in effort, a lot of hard work. And in the alle sugim melachos, in all the categories of the different works in the field, from charisha to plow, ziriyah to soak, etzirah to cut, v'chulu, b'meshech hashana during the year. So maybe it's a pipshuta shemikra. It's a good idea to sell a field so you can get a donkey, which will give you more, works all the time, and you don't have to work so hard. Zois void. That there's an additional point here, because the field takes time till it grows. By the donkey, you get paid right away. Zois void was the avoida v'hiluch haprakmatya mitn chamoyre, the work and the merchandise that you go with the donkey brings baldik and revach, it brings immediate profit. Or at least after a short while, you deliver the merchandise, you get paid for it. Aber by a sode kommt es erst noch a langere Meshach by a field that comes after a long duration, a long time. Nachdem es kommt der Zman Kitzira, you have to plant and plow and work. After you have to cut it. Und noch mehr. Not only cutting it, you have to gather to wait till you gather the grape. So you're going to say, Achamoir is better. So if this was true, it turns out as the Eitzah for Mechair Soda v'Kach L'Chamoir, that to tell the person to go ahead and sell your field and buy a donkey is Gar B'Chlolus B'Hoive and Eitzah Agon. Generally speaking, presently, that's not a bad idea to get a donkey instead of the field. So, and therefore, Rashi cannot just say, "Oh, why are you telling him to sell? It's not a good advice." It is a good advice. And the fact is that Rashi Messiah, so maybe that's the reason why Rashi has to conclude. So, but you are really trying to get his field. So you're giving him bad advice, not because of it, but you are trying to to circumvent him, go around, and you're going to take the field. Wegen dem Yoyitz. That we're talking about, when the Yoyitz is means that here we're talking in a situation where the advisor wants to take away the field, and that's wrong. But like this, it would not be such a bad idea. That's what Rashi cannot just say that it's a bad idea in of itself to tell him to sell the field. That's not a bad idea, as the Rebbe pointed out. The Rebbe does not accept this idea, while it seems like it's a better idea, but uh, it is in total analysis, it's not better to sell a field for a donkey, even though the Rebbe pointed out there were several advantages to get the reward right away. The song the donkey works, you don't have to work so hard. The donkey does the hard work, and as opposed to a field. The Rebbe explains now, hey, but this is klalnit glatik. This is not smooth. But Aleph, as his move on a poshut, it's understood, it's obvious. As on the other hand, there is an advantage of a field over a donkey. Rashi could say that it's a bad advice to sell a field. Why? K'moi. As for example, the shaykh was a misa, a donkey can die, a field doesn't die. Ubechlal, the arbeit mit the chamoir is verbunden mit tiltul derech. The work with the chamoir, you got to travel. From Bala Chamoir, the owner of the Chamoir has to travel. He must constantly travel from place to place. Mashenki by a soda, but by a field, the soda befindet sich besmichas leirei. In most cases, usually the field is next to his city, or the base to his house, and further. So there's advantages, but ultimately, schlepping with a chamoir is harder than a field which is usually next to the city. In addition, befrat, we're not talking about selling. For this person, it's not a good advice. As in Nitzuki Pasfarim, we're saying him is not fitting to go sell his field. There can be many situations. To him, the field is better. He's giving him a bad advice. In his case, we can find you many cases. Similar to the previous example, the Rebbe quoted Teres Kahanim. Say because bashkomo sheyakapchu listing. Over there, go out early so that the robbers will get it. Over there, it's not a bad advice to go out early, but for him, it's a bad advice. So Rashi is talking about him in his particular case. So over there, you see, go out so that the listim will. He knows that in that particular case, in the morning, the listim are still out there. So it's not hard to find cases where the soda for this guy is a no good idea. He shouldn't be selling it. So why do we need to bring in? So he's trying to take it away from him. Just don't give him bad advice. So the Rebbe is just saying here, the bad advice here is better advice for him in this case particular. That it's bad advice loy to him. So Bostam Tseba Hashkoma, generally to tell a person go in the morning is an Eitzah Tova. That's actually a good advice. Not in them fall, in this case, is a sarah. In this case, it's bad. Weil es eine veranlisted, because in this case there are bandits of them. It's like the precise language that Torah Kohanim said. It's not for him good, because in this case he shouldn't be going out in the morning because there's listed there. Und wie der Torah Kohanim is saying, the Torah Kohanim actually concludes, you're going to say, I gave him a good advice, meaning going in the morning is a good advice. But this is given to the heart, and yes, it could be a good advice, but in this case, you are giving him bad advice because there are listim over there. As the Yoitz ken gor haben, ken gor sorgen, as gemeint, as git an teva. So you see the way the Torah Kohanim reads it, that they want to give you the advice, can argue, I gave him good advice. Going out in the morning is good advice. So the whole issue, but it's not good for him in this case. So why can't we say this is the Eitzer Genes Loy to sell the donkey, to sell the field, to buy a donkey? And in this case, it's not a good idea for him. Even if you argue that sometimes selling a field for a donkey is good, which is also not the case, but even if you say that it is better sometimes, but if it's bad advice for him, we can find a case where his selling his field is no good for him. But the Rebbe says even a more stronger question. And the main thing is, let's say that Take, Rashi has a problem. What is it's not bad advice. So what's the problem? It's not bad advice to sell, let's say, to sell the field. Rashi wants to say that he's going to take it away from him. That's the bad. But just the selling the field, in this case, it's okay. That's not a problem, selling a field. The problem is because he's going to take away the field. So the Rebbe says, who cares? If it's not inherently bad for the seller of the field, because you're saying he gave him advice and the advice may be good. So what do we care if he goes and circumvents and takes the field away? To him, it's good. The other one is if you're saying it's not enough to say that this is bad advice because it's not bad advice, so why would it be bad advice just because he's coming and taking it away? If it's better for the owner of the field to have a donkey, it's better than a field. And that's why Rashi can't just say that it's bad advice, because it's not bad advice. Is vos artem, so why does it bother the owner of the field as the yoyitz oder noch zugenommen the sode by them was gekauft, that the one who consulted, who gave him the advice, went and bought the field by the one who bought it from him, from the Mesuba Badover, the one who was blind in it. As his Faron Suma Badover nit ke Michshol. He doesn't see, and let's say the buyer sees something there, but he doesn't see. And to him it was good advice. Is van zo'n nit ke Michshol, it's not a stumbling for him. Unafilo nit ken eitzer sheneganes loy, it's not even bad advice for him. For him it's doch besser zu haben dem Chamayr. For him it's better to have the donkey, if you're saying that the donkey is better than the field. Elava, then it must mean that it's not better. So why does Rashi have to go say that you're going to go and take it away from him? Taking it away from him doesn't work. If there's not bad advice, because for him it's good to sell the field to buy the donkey, so how is it that it becomes bad advice just because he takes it later on? Why does it make it bad? So we have to say it's bad advice in of itself. because to go sell the field instead of a donkey is not a good advice. So why does it actually have to say that you're going into circumventing him and you're going around going to get the field away? Why is that bad? All these questions, why does it actually have to give examples? And why does it actually have to give the example that you're going to take it away from him? And why Rashi chooses this example? And why Rashi takes it out from Pshuta Shel Mikra? Is all going to be answered by the Rebbe's Mahalach, the new insight that the Rebbe gives us that everything will be smoothed out. The Rebbe explains that Rashi's issue is, why do we need this pasuk altogether? To tell you that you're not allowed to cheat someone or you're not allowed to hurt somebody by whatever you're doing. We know that from before. We have to say the pasuk is coming to give something new. Yes, sometimes the Torah repeats itself to give you two lavim, but that's not the usual way to tell you, oh, the Torah writes it twice just to add an additional prohibition. Mostly we try to find a reason. What is this pasuk adding? Since the Torah doesn't allow to open a pit to hurt someone, you're telling him what to do and he hurts himself. This is, if you put a stone in front of the person and he trips, how is that different than a pit? Let's look inside. Well, the design verstanding Leitin Klau, we understand it according to the rule, Oich in Derech Hapshat, which also makes sense. As Bishaz the Torah Chazet Tibra Din was from Veishrim from Freyer. When the Torah reviews, repeats a halacha which you already know from before, darf man sich mishtadel sein zu gefinnen, we have to put an effort to find that in a Chiddush Din some novelty, why the Pasuk says that. We need zogen, and we don't say as that Iver Chazer in his blois. The reason we're saying it again, it's only to make more lavim, more prohibitions. Rashi says it sometimes when Rashi doesn't have another reason. Rashi would say labris belavim, but if we can find a reason why the Torah says a prohibition a second time, we have to try to find a reason. Und in the Erter, the Rebbe adds in the brackets, wo Rashi is mefarish lavar lov b'shnei lav. Those places where Rashi does say to violate, that when one violates it, it's two prohibitions, is as weil gefindt nicht dort b'derech hapshat a chiddush din, is because Rashi doesn't find there, in the simple pshat, a novelty of the halacha, so Rashi has to say a second lav. Uvimezet in Pirush Rashi in them posik gufa, as we see in this verse itself. Don't curse a dumb mute person. Is Rashi mefarish kinal minayin lerabis kolodom? How do we know you're not allowed to curse anybody? Talmud loymar, we have a pasuk. Ba'am choloi soy. Imkein lomo nemar chedesh. So what is a chedesh? Ma chedesh mechayim af mechayim. Why did Rashi you can't learn the pashtus? You could have learned simply. As chochis though that isur loy soir, even though we have a prohibition, you're not allowed to curse. What's this koilo kolodom, which includes everybody? So meaning everybody's included. State obe by chedesh biyuchad loisakalov. Then we say there's an extra pasuk loisakalov. Kadei tzutzukem by chedesh alavi yotir. To add by a chedesh an extra lav. If you curse a chedesh, besides the prohibition by everybody, you have an extra lav. Why doesn't Rashi say that and learns out only mechaim? Is a simon when we can learn something we should learn. A chiddush din, not just say it's a repeat just to add a lav. Is the full move on. So this we understand as Ipsis is not a meglach. If it's at all possible, darf men mefarish sein the psukim in an oifum. We need to explain the verses in a way. As we shouldn't have to say, this is more lavin. That's not the first answer. If we have no choice, we say that, but we should find something. So the Rebbe said, "Vaderach zeh benidin nedan." In our case, that inyan from Lifnei Iver loisit the Michshol kipshut. This idea not to put a stumbling for a blind person literally, kipshut as men tornit legen kein Michshol durch welchen an Iver soll genizig werden. You're not allowed to put a stumbling so that a blind person should get hurt. Weisman schön von dem, was steht früher in Torah. We know already from what is written previously in the Torah. Was redt wegen Kamo Passierungen as Suros. The Torah talks about many happenings which are prohibited. Built in Itsuyas, they're not desirable. Etc. It says, Vichi yiftach ish boir. When a person opens a pit, meaning a pit that was dug, you open it up. So somebody can get hurt. Or a person will dig the pit. He never covered it. He didn't cover it. It gets damaged. The owner of the pit has to pay. Das heißt, which means, as we told Mitona Azach, you're not allowed to do something like an Michshol to put a stumbling. Was wird gehen sein beim zweiten Hezek, which would cause the other person damage. You see, you're not allowed to do that. Un Aval P, but the Torah says, doesn't talk of that you're not allowed to do it. The Torah talks of that you got to pay for it. But if you got to pay for it, it means you're not allowed to do it. Then for sure you're not allowed to do it. Un Aval P as dort rest need the Torah beferish wegen Yisrael behetzah. But the Torah isn't discussing openly about the prohibition and the permission. Nor wegen Tashlum Efnezek, the Torah talk what to pay for damages. Is the Chadrab. It's the contrary. It's not meaning that it's not as serious, but it's even more serious. If you are punished for that, you have to pay for the damage that you caused. So for sure, you're not allowed. Of course, it's a prohibited. Well, noch better. And it's more because over there, the stumbling belongs to the public domain. It's a public area. Here, it's your Michshol. Well, noch mehr, der Michshol dort is gar nicht shaloi. It's not even his. Rashi dort befarish. Rashi explains as retzach wegen abayr b'shusarabim. We're discussing about a pit you open in the public domain. So you're making a stumbling block, not that you're putting down your own damages. Unafal became is the Baal HaTakolam b'chuyiv zu tzolem farnezek. The one who put this stumbling has to pay for the damages. Punkt wer wollt gewinnen, wer wollt gewinnen shelo, as if it was his. It's not mine, it's the public domain, but you made it there, you have to pay for it. Is doch sicher ados adavar asu. So for sure in our case, it's prohibited. Learn the Rebbe Rashi as da kommt zu anayir su yisur. Rashi therefore teaches us that here there's a new category for prohibition. Was wird nicht nichlal, which isn't included, we kennes nicht ablernen von dem din, and you cannot learn it from the halacha, ki yiftach ish ber gomer, that a person opens a bar, you cannot learn it from there. We're not talking about just plain damages you put for a blind person. We know that you're not allowed to do it. Why does the Torah have to tell us not to put a stumbling block? We have to tell us it's telling us something else. Bos is goyim dem zweiten hezek. You cannot learn it from the fact that you're causing the other one a damage. As the Rebbe will explain later on. The Rebbe explains later on that here we're actually talking about not to put a stumbling block even if you don't make him damaged. It's not at all like the Yiftach Yishboir. That's the whole Chiddush, and that's what Rashi chooses. The Rebbe goes on to explain. So the Rebbe basically sets down over here the idea that there's an additional pasuk. It has to be teaching us additional Chiddush. The idea that it's prohibited to put a stumbling block. If the Torah tells you have to pay for opening up a pit for the damages, for sure you're not allowed to put a stumbling block. Why would the Torah have to tell us? Torah teaches us a special chiddush over here, as the Rebbe will explain in the next sif and on. So now the Rebbe is going to explain that the other ideas that the Tereskanim say, you're actually causing damage to the other person. That will be included Kiyiftach Ishboir. Rashi needs to find the damage which is not directly damaging, and that will be the chiddush of the pasuk Zayin. Alpizay is moving by pashtus. Based on this, we understand simply Favos Rashi can not bring in the erste zwei dugmos from Teres Kahanim. Why Rashi cannot bring the first two examples of Teres Kahanim of Eitz Hoshena Genasloi, advice which is not proper for him. The first advice that Rashi brings, Tzei b'hashkoma sheyikapchu listim, or Tzei b'tzoraim b'shvul sheyishtarev. Go in the morning so that the robbers will attack you, or go in the afternoon, and he's advising you should get heated up. Such kind of advice which are not proper, verna derech hapshat Michshol. In the pshat, they're included in the minion from Kiyiftach Ishboir, when a person opens up a pit. Durch sein Eitzerod, by giving him the bad advice, hat Geirungen und zweitner Hezek, he caused him a damage. Now, it's not obvious. Emestake as der Gram is don't need boy for Nicker. It's not so recognizable with the Pula from Kiyiftach Ishboir as it is when you open up a pit and somebody falls in there. Aber in them is Klalke nafkeminen it legabe dem tetzor. But whatever the way you do it doesn't change the result. You caused the other one a damage. So in this case, you opened up a pit. Here you gave him bad advice. And the results, the consequence is the same. The guy is hurt. And that's also the reason we can't say that you're causing somebody to do an Aveira. Mitzad dem selben Tam can Rashi not learn. For this same reason, Rashi cannot learn as Lifnei Iver meint, as metonish Michshol sein at Sitein zu ton an Aveira, that you're not allowed to stumble somebody else to do an Aveira. Warum wie bald men tor nit gedem sein dem Zweiten a heze gashmit. Since we're not allowed to cause the other person a physical damage in Gufay, in his body and his assets, Alachas kama v'kamos. How much more so as metorim nit goyim zayna hezek benafshi, not allowed to cause him damage in his soul. So we also don't need a pasuk for that to tell that you're not allowed to hurt somebody by giving him something which is an aveda, and you're hurting him spiritually durch Iver zayin an aveda by violating an aveda. It's obvious that you can't do it. Wie men gefind Baruch in Parshas Bereshis, as we find at length portion of the Bereshis, that to advise and help somebody do an Aveda is something terrible. That's what Eitzadas, as der Far was the Nochash at Michshol given Chavan, because the snake caused Chava to stumble, mit Nechet Eitzadas, with the sin of Eitzadas, is a Bashtrav geworden mit einer Einish Chamor with a very serious punishment. You're cursed from all the animals. So there's a great punishment for causing somebody to stumble on a spiritual level in an Aveda. From here we understand the great prohibition to stumble somebody with an Aveda. Rashi is dort mefarish, and as Rashi says over there, that from here we learn that we don't try to find a merit if somebody convinces you to an Aveda. Normally, the snake could have said, well, why'd you listen to me? The Eibishter said, no, what do you mean I convince you? But we don't say that, because if you convince somebody, it's a terrible Aveda. So we see that doing this, causing somebody to stumble, is a great Aveda. We don't need a special pasuk for that. The Far brings Rashi Davke, so Rashi brings specifically the letzte dugma from Teres Kohanim, the last example of Teres Kohanim. Al toimar mechoyer sotcha v'kach lo chamer. Don't tell him, sell your field and buy for yourself a donkey instead. When he's there by Messiahim, and he concludes, v'ata oikev alo v'neit lo imenu, and then you circumvent him and you go and take the field from the one who we sold it to. Well, dafki in them dugma, It's specifically in this example that we have a new novelty of halacha and why we have a pasuk for that. Because here there's a whole nother definition in advising the person, not where something that he's really losing, but you're advising him with something which is to your benefit and not his. When Rashi adds the end, that you circumvent him and you take it from his Rashi Madgish, Rashi emphasizes that the Chesorim besteht nicht in Goyim sein, as der Sumas of Arbeit Nasode v'chamer. The problem here, the lacking over here is not because you caused the blind person to exchange a field for a donkey, so that's bad advice. Well, in them is nit muchrach as will sein hefset, because not necessarily there's a loss. Kinal sivdalet, like I said before, sivdalet. Maybe it's beneficial because the certain benefits come from a donkey versus a field. Not in them was the problem here is that the chisoron is that you are circumventing and taking from him. The Torah is al derech hapshat mechadish. According to Pshat, the Torah comes up with the novelty. Anayin dindo, a new halacha. Anayin did. A new halacha. So, nor in them was here the problem is that you're circumventing him and you're taking him. The Torah is al derech hapshat mechadish. The Torah comes up over here with a new idea. We're not talking about a prohibition to cause the blind person the damage. The Torah also prohibits to give him to also give him an advice which is not fitting for him. When you're giving advice, darf man in Sinnen haben, you have to have in mind, nor as the Eitzel soll sein against only that it should be fitting for him. That should be all. Und nicht trachten dabei wegen der eigenen Teilers, and not to think at the same time, oh, what am I going to benefit? Was kann davon marvier, was kann davon marvier sein? That which he can benefit from it. That's not allowed. Und das wird herausgebracht in the Dugma now. And this is expressed and brought out in the above example. In this example. Don't tell him to sell his field and buy a donkey. And you circumvent him and then you take the field. Even if the one who accepts your advice isn't going to have any loss at all, it's not something which is good for him. It's not for his need. Torah prohibited. Because when you give somebody advice, you need to talk about the other person. You have to have the other person in mind. You need to do what's good for him against loy. Not to utilize it for your own benefits. For your own, you might benefit. You're going to circumvent him and take him. Even though he has no loss, that's not the way you give advice. He can think to himself, he's not missing anything. I'm advising him to sell it, but he's not going to lose anything. So what does he care if he's going to benefit? He's benefiting, the other one's not liking it. Und das sagt Rashi, the Iver Michshol. Don't give a stumbling. Don't give him advice which is not good for him. Michshol, the stumbling is koila. When for them suma bedover, a stumbling here includes, even though the person who's blind is nit arizikum ken hefset klal, he didn't lose, nothing came out as a result of loss, nor. Der Michshol, der Durchfall, what is the failure here? What is the stumble? Is blois in oifun sinus eitza. The stumbling is the way you give the advice. That's the Michshol. You're giving advice which benefits you, not him. Eitza shenegen asloi. The summa meant the blind one in the one who's getting the advice means he thinks that he's advising what's good for him. Und der Yoyetz is Oikefalov. And what he's doing is he's circumventing him. Nart him up, he cheats him, he tricks him. Und gibt him an Eitzel if he darko ivahana gives him an Eitzel according to his own way and his own benefit, even if he's not causing him a loss. That's the Michshol, that's the stumble. And the Rebbe says we also understand the next Rashi test. Apizevet merech verstehen the arichas haloshen for Rashi, the great length of Rashi in his commentary of Yiresu Melikecha. Yishufir Melikecha. Lefi shadover hazeh eine mosur librias leida. This is not that people can know. Im daitush is a letoiv lero. Does he mean for the good or for the bad? V'yochel lishomet v'loimer. He can slip away and say, Letoivo niskavanti, I had in mind for the good. Lefikach nemar boy v'yereisom elikecho hamakin machshvisacho. That's why it says, by the person, you should be afraid from Hashem. The Eibishter knows your thoughts, so you should be afraid from Hashem. So this is different. Mashengen teres kainim v'or zok b'kitzer. Shema toimer eitza toiva niyosan loy. I give him a good advice. Varei adovor mosur lelev. Shenema v'yireiso melekechani Hashem. In the Torah's kainim is the diuk Shema toiver eitza toiva ani niyosan loy. You're going to say, oh, I'm giving him good advice. Meaning that really you're not giving him good advice. To say Slapoil is as given an Eitzara. Nor Abbas of Adam can in the Farni Bashuldikun, but he cannot be faulted. According to the Torah's Kahanim, he gives a bad idea, but you can't fault him. Hayois, as der Yoyetz can sich verantworten. The one who's advising can excuse himself as er hat gemeint hat, das ist a good Eitzah. He thought it was a good advice. When the far is as a dover most of the life. That's how the Torah is coming. That's why it's given over the heart. Leut Rashi ober, but according to Rashi, is not the chilik to the eitzes bepoil given an eitzah teva. The difference is not between what you're advising and what you have in mind is because it was bad and now it's really bad and you said that it was good. It's not the difference the Eitzim Pearl given Eitzah Tova Eitzah. Now the ganze Sache is blois an Inyan B'Shaychit Sudaito. It's all connected to what you have in mind. Und Kavonos Oda, what he had in mind. Sie hat besaßen geben the Eitzah getraf wegen dem Zweiten oder nicht. What were you thinking when you're giving the advice? Did you think what is good for him? Or you thought, you didn't think. You thought what is good for you, not for him. That's a Michshol. That's v'yereisum elekecha. And therefore, Rashi says, not that you give him a meitzara. It says, in the most of them, what you have in mind. But it's not that you gave him a bad advice. Und das kann man nicht wissen, nach vielen Norden, wie der Jöitz hat abgekauft ist, oder? Even when the one who advised him bought the field later on, maybe it wasn't so bad for him to sell it. Weil es kann sein, als nicht das ist gewesen sein Kavona betchila beim Geben der Eitzah. Maybe that wasn't his intent when he gave the advice. He thought that he should sell it because that's good for him. Nor dennoch hat sich gemacht a Gelegenheit, soll können abkaufen des Sode. And then there's an opportunity to buy the field from the Lekech Min Iver, the one who bought it from the blind person. So he didn't even have in mind, he can argue, I didn't have in mind myself, and we don't even know that you had in mind yourself because He can argue. So I got an opportunity, so I bought it. That's not what I told him. It's not bad. And it's not even good for him. That's also came about. That's what he can argue. If them zog the post v'reisim lokecha makim Michshol sicha. The Eibishter knows your thoughts. Veis was the Rodum trag by geben the He knows what the person is thinking when he gave the advice. So Rashi learns that the problem is here when you're giving a advice and don't have the interest. You're not making him lose anything, but your interest is not really him, and you're giving advice. That's his stumbling. And you can always say later on, I gave him good advice. And why did I buy it? The opportunity came across. If you're not having him benefit in mind, and then you go around and you take it, then Yud. This is a wondrous lesson in the meaning of Havas Yisrael and the idea of loving thy fellow. Of how a Jew is obligated to place himself to the benefit of another Yid. Es ist nicht genug, was du für sich an öffnen. It's not sufficient that you conduct yourself in a way as the Zulas so hat bepoilate Elos von sein Hanhoge, that the other person in actuality has a benefit from your conduct, that do things that benefit the other person. Nor in them is euch negeya sein derech, also your path, kavona matorah. It's important what your intention, what your goal is. When you're doing somebody a favor, darfst du in Ganzen sein ausgetan von sich. You must totally be addressed. You not think about yourself. Und trachten durch euch wegen dem zweiten Matter. You need to think entirely about the other's condition. Und da hat so ja room, weil sich in dem nicht reinmischen können, so then no personal matters will intervene. You have to fully be focused what's good for the other person. And that is Viresim Elakecha, and that's why Lesit Michshol, was damult is the kim von Havas Yisrael and Anaifen. Then you fulfill loving thy fellow in such a way, from Vahavtu L'Reach Kamoicha. You love him like yourself, B'shasman field, as the Reach is Kamoicha B'Pashtus, when you feel that the friend is like you, it's like yourself, Kamoicha Mamish. Re'echo is nit Kinzulas. The other person, not somebody else. Not is ein zach medir, Achdus Yisrael. It's one thing, one. Jewish people are one. Achdus. Damus trachter wegen Re'achin an Eifun. Then you think about your friend in a way, was vernimmt him im Ganzen, takes him up totally kamoicha mamish. This is Sichos Shabbos Parshas Kedoshim, Tovshin Mem Aleph.